Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Social Work 12 podcast. Taylor and Faith here. And this is going to be one of our continuing education episodes. And so excited to be talking about this topic micro pipeline in social work. Super fascinating.
Yes.
We have
Super
Patrick
fascinating.
Taylor here to talk
Hello,
with
hello.
us about this. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's just get into it. Tell us a little bit about you, your background, like what you're
Yeah.
working on. Yeah.
Okay. I'll start from military. I am a Air Force veteran. My background is in, oddly enough, it's very eclectic: computer, IT work, and pharmacy tech, sociology, stuff like that. And then I pivoted to social work. Spent my entire career so far in direct practice. But I've always felt like a pull towards system level work. And that's honestly why I got into it, because I wanted to do macro practice. But I kept getting pointed back to clinical work. I'm also a student, a doctoral student at USC, University of Southern California. And that tension I mentioned became the focal point of my doctoral research. And yes, I named it the issue that is the micro pipeline in social work. It indicates a gap in our education, our licensure, our legitimacy, the job market, et cetera, et cetera. Very systemic issue. And it's why I created the intervention that started with just workshops, but has now become a business venture called Macro Pathways. So right now I'm building up that organization, still currently running a national survey, developing presentations. I'm basically doing what I wish someone had done for me when I was trying to figure out where macro actually lives.
Yeah, in the bio that you sent us, I highlighted, Faith and I were talking a little bit about it before, just you saying my academic work centers on the structural conditions that limit the visibility of macro practice and career access. That is just so interesting. I'm just like it's just wild because Faith and I have talked about, just as we're learning about more macro pathways, and very cool that that's your business name. It just really, there was not a lot of exposure to that work. So yeah, really, really interesting. Before we get into talking about like the micro pipeline and all your research, can you tell us what you like describe as macro? Like how do you see macro and how do you explain it to people?
Yeah, I've learned that often it's better to define things by what they aren't. And so how I define macro is it's not client centered, it's not interpersonal services. Anything else very easily translates into anything macro, even if it's meso. It can translate into systems work. But there are even micro skills that translate as well. It just isn't directed to the individual, the family, or the group. It's for the broader community.
Interesting. Okay. Let's get into the micro pipeline in social work. Like that's your whole thing. You coined the term. Did you trademarked it? Did I
Hmm.
see that? Wow. Okay. Um, what does this mean? Walk us through this.
Yeah. Before it had a name, I just, I saw that gap and I saw that divide, and I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Dawn Apgar. A lot of her research informed a lot of this, and she identified what she calls the micro macro divide. And she spoke to a lot of the issues within our profession, like how it's, disproportionately balanced. We're heavy on clinical and very light on macro. And so when I started doing my research, I decided to focus on why this was an issue. Why is there a divide? And ultimately, the more digging I did, the more systemic that it appeared to be. I figured it needed a name that really spoke to it, right? There's no bad guy, there's no villain. It's a very systemic issue. And instead of pointing a finger, like this is where the name came from. And I just like naming things. So the micro pipeline in social work, it sounds very much like a systemic issue if you think of the pipeline in any situation. But what it is, the micro pipeline in social work is the systemic funneling of social workers primarily and disproportionately into client-centered service, interpersonal service delivery, often at the expense of macro practice support, development, and visibility. The consequences are structural. If someone were to ask me, why is that an issue? Well, it's an issue because it takes away half of our identity. We were born, the profession was born with a dual identity to not only help the individual, but to address the systemic injustice that brings them to us in the first place. We lose that part of our identity in chase of legitimacy within the medical model. But I think that we can't effectively position ourselves to actually address systemic issues or systemic conditions that we're trained to recognize. Like it's a type of helplessness that I've seen, not I've experienced, but I've also seen it with others who have individuals come to them and they're having a housing crisis, but there's no amount of box breathing that's going to solve their problem. It's a very much a systemic issue. And those individuals within those office spaces might not know how to address this issue, might not know how to talk to their representative, might not know how to, advocate for legislation or anything like that. So again, there's no villain, just structural logic, constantly reproducing itself through education, licensure, funding, and culture.
That's so awesome to hear you say that out loud. It reminds me of this concept when that we talked about in grad school. It's like if there's a river, right? And there's somebody throwing babies in a river and you're on the end of the river pulling babies out, right? That's the people doing direct practice. But like the macro work is who's throwing babies in the river? Like who's doing that? We need to also stop babies from going down the river, right? You need people at both ends. And I think you spoke really eloquently about like that's a problem that we have a lot of social workers on one side and we are going to lose our dual identity. I've never heard it phrased that way and I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Um, I'm curious about you mentioned earlier you kind of noticing this push while you were going through school or trying to figure out kind of what your next steps were. Can you talk a little bit about what you were experiencing when you were in school and yeah.
Yeah. Um, I guess the inception of everything started with my misconception of the career field. I started doing interviews for different career fields I was interested in, talking to psychologists, psychiatrists, talking to other individuals who had their doctorate or their master's, and every single one that I talked to, every single one that I told them about my interests and what I was interested into, every single one told me, "You want to go into social work." In my head, they were telling me to go into CPS. I was like, I don't want to take people's kids away. Huge misconception, common misconception. But someone told me to do my research. I did my research, and I saw how varied, how broad a scope that social work is, and you can work in the clinical field, the medical field. You can work uh, in adoption. You can you can be in CPS if you want, but you can also work in policy. You can work in law. You can do all those things as well. So I got excited about that, especially the macro stuff, because at the time, I really did want to get into policy, more into policy. I wanted to understand it better. I wanted to learn how to find bills, read them. Like I did not know how to do any of that. And so that's why I pursued it. Very excited. Also, I get bored easy, and in social work, you never get bored. It's a wonderful career field if you if you need something to keep your attention. But then I joined a MSW program, and I think the moment of clarity came, and I couldn't. It's not something I could have named at the time, but professors were telling us that clinical licensure was the financially viable path. It was the path if you want job security. And in my head, especially with my military background, my thought was, okay, maybe it's a pay your dues type of thing. Maybe I have to take this route in order to get to where I want to be. And so I just played the game and I went clinical and I learned all that I needed to do. They told me to get my clinical. I got my clinical. But the further I got into my career, I did not see a through line or a pipeline or just a path to the macro side of social work. Everything just pulled me in deeper into clinical work. And I'm very much qualified for most clinical and micro positions, but not at all qualified, at least not how it's written currently on my CV, for anything macro like policy, like law, or anything like that. So I then thought maybe I get my doctorate. Doctorate will let people know that I'm ready for macro. I'm glad I went into a doctorate program because that's when I learned about the grand challenges for social work. If you've never heard about the challenges of social work, what it is one of our social work's most ambitious initiatives. It was born in or created in 2013, I believe, well before I graduated my MSW. Um, but I never heard about it. I never knew what it was, and it sounds like something that I would have been excited to learn about. I mean, it provides not just the information, not just the intractable wicked problems that you can try to get involved in and address, but it gives you that framework and it gives you some type of hope and motivation in that direction to see that this already exists. As I moved through my DSW program, I just went down a rabbit hole, just asking questions. Why haven't I heard about the grand challenges of social work? Has anybody else heard of grand challenges of social work? I kept asking social workers. They don't know. They think it's just some grandiose term that I use to talk about social work.
Can you actually explain what is the grand challenges of social work? Because I don't know what that
I know,
is.
I know. He mentioned it to me a couple months ago and
I've
never
never
heard
heard
of
of it,
it.
and we both
What
have
so
our masters, so, like,
right.
we're
Yeah.
What are some of I guess maybe what are some of the ground challenges for social work like and the
Sure.
purpose?
So the grand challenge for social work, as far as its purpose is concerned, I would love to believe that it is just an initiative to address some of the intractable wicked problems. An intractable wicked problem is a problem that's not easily resolved. Think ending homelessness. That's one umbrella. Think close the health gap. That's another umbrella. And I believe there's 14 total challenges. And under each one of those umbrellas, there's the very specific issues, right? Um,
I found some. I found some eradicate social isolation, like you
yep,
said, and homelessness, prevent gun violence, harness technology for social good, eliminate racism. Wow. Promote smart, I don't even know how to say that word. Build
incarceration,
financial thank you.
de-
Promote
decarceration.
smart decar okay. Oh, I need more coffee. Um build financial capability and assets for all. Okay, that's just a few, but wow, these are grand.
Wow,
Super
wow.
ambitious, right? Like,
Super ambitious. Eliminate racism?
yeah, and-
Okay.
Wow. Is this
but
a US thing or national or international?
International, yeah.
I would hope it's international, but it seems to have been born here, like
Okay.
it's within the U.S. But yeah, super ambitious initiatives, and there's I don't think the idea is to really truly resolve it, but to have people, kind of gravitate towards their issue of interest and really focus in on filling those gaps because that's what it's all about, just filling those gaps. We're taught to identify the solution landscape of any given problem. For my problem, the micropipeline and social work, the solution landscape looks like dual degree programs, DSW programs, some macro organizations. The problem with the education side is it assumes we have money. And now, the ramifications of today's administration regarding us being a professional degree or not being a professional degree anymore makes that even worse. So where are they going to get that, you know, macro training? Where are they going to get that experience in another field, in another sector, or another industry? And then the organizations that exist, they're doing what they can. Network for Social Work Management, I love their work. They provide certificates for the schools that they partner with. Everybody who graduates gets one, and it's like a management type certificate. Then there's a COSA. They're a macro focus social work organization as well. And they're also trying to get in with students and stuff like that. I guess what I didn't see was any type of direct early intervention, and that was the gap that I saw. And I think people will they if you don't show them, if you don't hold their hand, essentially, they're going to find the easier path. And I try to imagine, two pathways. One is well lit, the grass is cut, is it's a very
Apparently,
clear
there's money at
pave.
the end of it.
Yeah. And then there's another one that's completely grown over. It's like a jungle, and you just hear noises and scary things over there.
Right.
And I like to think that my initiative and my program, alongside educational efforts, alongside those organizations that are doing good work, are helping pave that path for others. My fear is that eventually the pendulum is going to swing back. Yeah, things look bad now, but that's history. Like we'll be in a bad place. We'll have our revolution of some sort, and then it'll swing back, and then social work goes right back to okay, let's just stick to clinical. And no preventative efforts are in place. I think that the profession is largely reactive in that sense. We work best as a buffer between the uncaring system and the communities that we serve. And even now, that's not even. I mean, we're like worn away cartilage between bones. We're trying our best, but we're also trying to survive as a profession at this point.
Yes,
So
yes, yes. So, not to yeah, just to summarize so that my understanding is correct, it's like the gap that you're trying to, meet through macro pathways is to create some sort of way for social workers to access macro leaning jobs and to kind of yeah, do some gardening in that area of our profession. Yeah, and then, like, be like, "Hey, it's nice over here, it's not scary over here." You can
Mhm.
actually smell
yeah,
the flowers are actually growing. So, okay, that was one of
Yeah.
our questions was, like, what is the goal? And that's a really awesome goal.
It
Yeah.
sounds like a grand challenge.
Yes,
Maybe
yes.
maybe a mini challenge.
Mini. Yeah.
Um, I'm curious about, like, in your view, where does the grand challenges fit into this, like, pipeline or the systemic thing issue that you're seeing? Do you think that the lack of this conversation in our programs is just, I is why one of the reasons that, there's this pipeline because this is a good example. We don't talk about this, right?
I would say yes, but my research shows different. So people have been talking about this for decades. People have been writing about this for decades. There are books, articles. There are people in very prominent positions who, after their experience, have pointed out, "Hey, this is an issue." I don't see uh why it was crazy to see that I developed such a following in trying to address this issue, and I look back in history, I'm like these people were doing it too. Why haven't we resolved this yet? And then I get jaded and and I'll look at like NASW's recent push. They I don't know if you read their blueprint. It's usually the policies that they're going to be advocating for the career field, and if you look through it, everything is for the client-centered social worker. It's for the licensed clinical social worker. The incentives are for individuals who are going to fill spots in those mental health spaces. That loan repayment. That there's nothing like that for anybody in macro.
I saw
Nothing.
you write about that. I thought that was super fascinating about how, because, for example, I was a recipient of a behavioral health loan repayment award from my state as because I am a clinical social worker. But there were definitely specific, requirements around the population I was working with. There was nothing that talked about, I could get this money if I was working in government or policy or some sort of like community
Mm.
setting. I needed to be working
Yes.
one on one with people.
Huh.
So that is just so interesting that you, yeah, just have made that connection where it's like, okay, yeah, NASW, that is macro work that they're doing, right? The blueprint and these initiatives, but within the macro work, their only focus is on the clinical social worker.
Yeah. And again, there's no villains here. As much as
Right.
I try to vilify anybody, but they're responding to job market. They're responding to programs only stay open if students go to them and pay for them. So they're responding to what the students want. A lot of students do come into the career field, and it's a quick way to therapy, right? A quick way to a private practice. But then, I love the questions I see from the newer generations. What's the ROI? How much money am I going to get from this and stuff like that? And I'm working so hard to debunk the idea that clinical is the only viable path. You really think about it from the post BSW, you have to do 1 year advanced track, but if you don't have a BSW, you have to do 2 years to get your MSW. Then you graduate. You have to now put in hours towards your licensure. It can take up to 2.5 to 3 years. Then you have to test. Hopefully, you pass it on the first try and don't miss it by 1 point. Um,
Mhm,
but
mhm,
we'll
mhm.
just
I almost
consider
missed
it.
it by 1 point. That was almost me. I was like, "Did I pass? I don't know." Yeah. Mhm.
That's a lot of
But
people's
yeah, you have to
experience.
do that. You have to pay into that. And
Mhm.
then let's say you get your licensure. To be competitive for those higher paying jobs, you still have to have 2 years post LCSW, sometimes three, because they're looking for people who can provide supervision. And that gets you to a median of approximately 65, 70K a year. You take that same BSW, you get them a little bit of policy experience, they become an entry level policy analyst. They're already at about 60, 70K entry level. They put in that same 7 to 10 year time frame, they are likely to be in six figures by the time someone gets their LCSW or gets an opportunity to be competitive in the clinical field.
It's so nice to hear you kind of, like, explain that in such a simple way, in such a tangible, digestible way. I'm curious, going back to this conversation about why is it that there's research on this, people have been talking about this, but no one has actually taken the steps to provide this pathway for social workers to access macro? Like, you're like, "We've been talking about this, but yet nothing's been happening." What have you learned, like, what have you learned as to why that is?
The why it eludes me. The why is
Mm.
again, that is a never ending rabbit hole. But again, to shout out Akosa. Akosa has been around for a bit, and I think it's important to say that they do very clear, very strong and organized work to try to bring light to the macro side of social work, try to advance the macro side of social work. But if there's anything that tells me, it tells me that it very much is an uphill battle. It's like skating uphill. It's impossible. But I think that is one organization. Network for Social Work Management is another organization. Macro Pathways is going to be another organization. I think the more these things pop up and the more we try to find sustainable ways for them to remain and maintain that presence, we'll be able to resolve this. And again, I think it's important to know that I am not anti clinical. I'm pro balance. And I think that's what we're missing as a career, as a profession, that balance.
Yeah.
Mm, mhm.
You mentioned you did a survey with social workers, and that's influencing your work with your DSW. Can you talk about what you're learning or what you have learned? Are you continuing to collect responses? Where are you at with that? And what,
Yeah.
what has that shown?
It's so the survey is still ongoing. It's the national survey, and the whole purpose of the survey was to get information from students and early career graduates as far as what their MSW experience was like regarding like macro exposure or what the practicum exposure, knowledge about macro in general, and whether they have an understanding of how to get those jobs and stuff like that. It will be closing at the end of this month, but preliminary data, upwards to I think about 300 people took the survey. Approximately 75% said they want macro level work. about 85% said macro is just as important as clinical work, and more than half entered entered our profession, entered this field specifically to drive systemic change. Yet, roughly 65-70% could not find the macro job market. Over half could not identify the job titles. Fewer than half felt that a program actually prepared them. Like around 40% felt like they were actually prepared. But the other number kind of contradicts that because, if we look at the imbalance article from 2020 or 2022 showed that about 80% of our career field is clinical and about
Wow.
7% is macro. And I know that doesn't equal 100, but there's some in between there. um, and those ones in macro are siloed. They're individualistic everywhere, and we're starting to build community for sure. But I still feel like we're siloed. I still see repetitive intervention. I see overlap when there should be like coalition. There should be collaboration.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I kind of want to go back to the grand challenges piece of our conversation. You know, I'm curious, is there a gap between what the grand challenges call for and how the profession is currently training social workers? How
Yeah,
would you see that? Yeah.
for sure. So the BSW, MSW student population largely do not know about the grand challenges. There's literally no space within the curriculums that have been built for them, and to introduce them would be to add a pinch of confusion to the market that they're trying to conform to. The grand challenges, the only reason I know about it is because USC's curriculum is built around it. And I think that is the case with some schools, but it is not prominent in as prominent as it needs to be for all of social work to be very well versed in it. I think that the major gap, and I was talking with the director, the ED of the Grand Challenges of Social Work, and she asked me like, "What do you see the problem is?" And I told her like, I think we just don't see ourselves in the grand challenges. And that lends to a whole other problem. Social workers in schools, students, they don't see themselves in policy because when they think policy, they think politics, and so they don't see themselves as a politician, or they don't see themselves as in a leadership role, or I think that our career field attracts a certain type of person, very empathetic, very caring. It looks like largely very meek and willing to be a martyr. That the burnout is a badge of honor. um, I think that the newer generation coming up are a little bit more progressive, and that is not how they want to define themselves. But they definitely want the ROI. So I think that is the major gap. The major gap is we don't see ourselves within the grand challenges. We don't see ourselves addressing those issues. And I think that's an identity issue. We see ourselves as clinical. We see ourselves in small spaces doing one-on-one stuff, not in those big spaces changing societies. That's crazy to me that we don't see that in ourselves.
Yeah. And I feel like
Yeah.
when you were saying earlier that you had this misconception about what social work is, about, we're only CPS workers. I also had that misconception when I first learned about social work. And now obviously, our minds are expanded, but I feel like there's still like another level we all need to go. It's like, okay, we all know that we're not just CPS workers. There's so much we can do with a clinical license. We're still, or, as a clinical social worker, we're still also, I think, learning about what that can look like. But I feel like there's still another level that we need to get to where it's like, this is the range. And yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. And one thing go ahead, Faith.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I also just think like some of the micro social workers, direct practice social workers, they're living in that system and working with their clients in a system that maybe isn't benefiting their clients. And they could be some of the best macro social workers out there, because when you live a system or work within a system or you're seeing it, you're like, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. And you're just like running around like whack-a-mole trying to, and I think if you can then, I don't know, transition somehow from micro to macro, which is
Yeah.
what you're trying to help people do, you can do such good work on that level because you've seen some of the problems, you've lived some of the problems, you've interacted in a different way with the system. So I just think that's such a important thing you're doing in that sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the insight that direct practice social workers could bring,
Mhm.
if they wanted to go into macro. I've heard you mention about calling these macro roles non-traditional, which I am guilty of. I saw you say that, and I was like, "Oh, I
Taylor's
do
like, oh
that.
God, I got called out. Oh boy.
No,
Whoops."
it's okay. It's okay.
But it was so eye-opening. It's like, it's not non-traditional, it's social work. But that's another part of the issue, right? Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about what just that whole concept and what you've seen around
Yeah.
that?
Um, I appreciate you naming that and putting me on the spot. You but you naming that, I think it's important because most of us are guilty of it. I was guilty of it at one point, and I just had to question because I'm a stickler for language. I was like, what does that mean? And so to say non-traditional, when we call macro non-traditional, we're implying that clinical is the default. We're implying that
Yes.
everything else is a departure from social work. We're implying that macro is not
Mhm.
real social work.
Oh
Um,
yes.
Macro practice is
Wow.
not non-traditional. It is social work. Policy,
Yes.
advocacy, research, program design, community organizing, those aren't detours from the
Yes.
Mm.
profession. They're core to what social work was built to do. The word
Mm.
itself, non-traditional, it reproduces the pipeline that I'm talking about. When a student
Mhm.
hears non-traditional, many hear risky, or they, you know, self-select back towards what feels safer. Dropping that word costs nothing. It will cost nothing. And I think it will help change the culture if we can modify our language around how we talk about macro social work.
I love it.
Yes.
Love it.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, no,
I'm like
that's
fired up
really
right
good.
now. I'm feeling
I
so fired up.
know. This is
I don't know.
just so it's so
Yes.
good. It's so good, Patrick.
So good, Patrick. It really is. It really is. Ah. Okay,
Okay,
what are
where
we
are we at
asking
real quick?
next?
I know, I'm like, pause. Where are we at?
Yeah.
I have two questions that are off of our that are not on our list.
Yeah.
And then maybe we could get to the licensure piece.
Okay.
Mhm.
Um, you mentioned, some schools are like USC bringing the grand challenges for social work into kind of the conversation. Can you talk about what you've seen in terms of programs, and you don't have to name names, but just structural, coursework, things like that. What have you seen programs doing well in trying to address this? I feel like there are programs that are more macro focused. What is it that they do that other schools aren't doing?
Good question. So the programs that do provide macro tracks seems like the way I see it, it looks like it's a niche. Like you can do that if you want to.
That's how it was with
Um,
us.
yeah.
Yeah. It was like the what, 5 tracks. It was health, which I did. What, mental health, clinical, which
Mhm.
Faith did. Schools,
Schools. Yep.
and then it was macro, which is wild when now that I know, it's like macro. That's just we're just saying, just that's the macro track. It's so broad.
It's
It
so broad.
there's
It
so
is.
much more than just being like, that's the one. And there was 5 people who were going down that path.
Mhm.
Yeah, anyways.
I mean, I think what I wanted to do initially was I wanted to team up with the MSW program and help revamp that program in order to make sure that there was more tangible macro aspects to it. Whether that meant, you know, I wanted to make sure that they had macro practicums, and I was willing to call anybody in their area and just, sell social work to get macro practicums. There's already a guide out there. to create practicums. I wanted to team up with the MSW program. I wanted to help them bolster a macro aspect, and I wanted to make sure that it was a program that did not have a macro track or anything. I wanted to implement mentorship, job fair for graduates, a panel so that they can hear people talk about their
So
experiences,
cool.
and hopefully
Mhm.
a practicum. As cool as it is, the only people who were interested were people who already had robust macro tracks and robust macro situations. Take ASU, for instance, Arizona State. They have an awesome macro track. They have more macro providers than they have macro students. They have placements out there. They do,
Wow.
panels. And I think that's awesome. And I got to talk with professors over there, but they already have it, right? No
Right.
one else
Yeah,
was
they
giving me
see
that
that
time.
they recognize the benefit of it, and
Yeah.
that's why they wanted to partner with you because they get it.
That being said, you know, we're in the times that we live in, there's fear, right? A lot of changes. A lot of language is being removed. DEI is being removed. Some programs have closed. It's just a scary time for social work. And I think people just became very protective of their curriculum, which is fine. When I run into a wall, I just find another way around. And in this case, I just decided to pivot and create something that's not in conflict with them, but that ran parallel with the educational programs. Something that was easily accessible, something that was remote, something that is entry and anybody can do. And hopefully at some point, I'll be able to do that on a national level. Well, I have been doing it on a national level, but I mean, hopefully at some point it becomes bigger and we have more reach within uh, other areas, more connections with other universities and programs. Yeah, but it's going to take time.
So your initial goal was to revamp maybe a program or multiple programs that didn't have a macro track, and you ran into some challenges, and you then decided, I'm just going to open up macro pathways and kind of try to see how I can, yeah, like you said, provide these resources on my own. Was it a response to people not being willing to want or wanting to work with you?
Probably a trauma response, if we're being honest. Like, I'm just reacting to barriers. And when there's a barrier, I don't like barriers. I like options too. And so I will just find a way beyond whatever's in front of me, whether I got to go through it or around it. And oftentimes, it's better to just go around because you want to collaborate, not create conflict or issues. So in this case, it just made better sense to work around, not only just for that, but also because you avoid bureaucracy and red tape. I have control over the decisions of macro pathways and how it grows and what we
Yeah.
offer and how people access it. It doesn't live only at one university.
Yeah.
And then, we end up furthering the research and then is it transferable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm free from all of that. And I think this was the better choice ultimately.
Nice. That's great. I'm curious to kind of talk more about like this licensure part of our field. We've been talking about how licensing is kind of the path that we tend to go for, or is the end goal for social workers. Um, but how should a social worker who's pursuing macro roles think about licensure? Like, how should they view it and consider it?
Ooh, licensure, the way it's framed is legitimacy, destination. You get your LCSW, you are a social worker.
Yeah, I remember
Um,
you mentioned the
Mhm.
legitimacy before.
yeah,
What do you mean by legitimacy?
I mean, if you take you know, take a ride in history, there's a individual who stood up and basically questioned the legitimacy of our profession, saying that we are not
Right.
a profession, basically. And so
I
social
didn't
work
know this.
scrambles. Yeah, no,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You've
you
heard of
should
that, Faith?
definitely.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But I
Um,
remember taking a policy class in my master's program where they talked about this, like, to legitimize our profession. But keep
mhm.
going, Patrick. Yeah. You were
Yeah,
saying,
no,
sorry.
And then social work scrambles, right? We adopt the medical model, we lean heavily into clinical. Now we have legitimacy. And I have no doubt that that was important at the time. No doubt at all. I think we live in a different time. I think that legitimacy lies in a different form, and it doesn't just lie here. But there has been no, as far as I can tell, no efforts to create a legitimacy for anybody who wants to go macro. There's no licensure. There might be certs and stuff like that, and you can get another degree in, like a JD or a business degree, but again, that assumes a lot. That assumes we have money for that. That assumes that the people that are hiring us are going to even consider our certs. I've sat on many panels, interview panels for federal work, and you'd be surprised how much gets glossed over, because there is a point system for the federal system, and they
Hmm.
just go by do they have these things on their resume? How did they do in their interview? Stuff like that.
Hmm.
I, I just think that licensure in most program cultures, the LCSW is important. Even if you're not in clinical work, it's still important because again, that's how they identify you as legitimate. That's how they identify you as being able to do more things, supervision, stuff like that. It also it reinforces the pipeline because it positions clinical skill development as the only legitimate post MSW investment. It signals to students that macro work is not where the profession's infrastructure points. The micro pipeline of social work is partly a licensed architectural, a licensed structural problem. um,
Yeah.
and I think the hours required for clinical licensure kind of lock practitioners into direct service for years, much like I was, often before they have any meaningful exposure to what macro work actually looks like. And it's reinforced, right? Your practicum experience plays a huge role into what you're going to go into. Many
Yeah.
people definitely try to get hired on by their practicums for that supervision, for those skill building and stuff like that. Um, our standards for supervision for practicum won't allow us to be supervised by, let's say, a policy analyst or someone who's not in the social work field, but could help us develop a skill set that is very useful within social work. Um, there are caveats and there's ways around, for sure, but I think I think we've learned to just take the easier route, I guess, and that's a whole other issue.
Mhm. Yeah.
What's the
Yeah.
issue? Well, we have time.
So the easy that is a whole human issue.
I
Of
Yeah.
course, we're
see.
gonna take the easier path, like it's a
Right, right.
survival
Mhm.
thing. We
Well, it's
don't.
like what you were
Safer.
mentioning
Yeah.
earlier. It's like, well, is it the easy path or is it the path that is all green and well lit and inviting
Both.
and
The
apparently
path.
there's money at the end of it.
Yeah, it's the path with least resistance for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's again, it's very innate. It's a survival thing. We don't like
Yeah.
change. I love change personally, but
Hmm.
as a collective, we do not like change.
So you're talking about macro pathways, your business as the intervention for this systemic issue.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little? I know you mentioned a little bit about the things that you're doing, but can you talk a little bit more about your vision for this intervention? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, what you're doing now and what you hope it looks like in the future.
So my vision is for macro pathways to become the national hub for macro practice support and development. I hope that that comes to fruition. That is my dream for what I'm building. Right now, it's about, I guess, just to go back to what the data is showing from my studies, there's not a lack of interest in macro. There's a lack of navigation to get to where you want. There's a lack of being able to translate your clinical skills into those systems level practice skills. I think that macro pathways is going to be doing and producing presentations, workshops, trainings. We want to eventually, I mean, I have very lofty ideas of what I want to do. I want to open a foundation. I want to support students who want to take that macro route and help fund their education. I want to open my own school of social work and make sure that I develop it as macro, not even macro being centric, definitely very generalist, but true generalist. Like, you're going to learn about systems work, you're going to learn about community based participatory research, you're going to learn about design thinking. And at the end of that, your capstone isn't just going to be so you can pass and graduate. It's going to be something that you truly are passionate about and can live beyond your graduation so you can implement it. I think that those skills will serve you at any level. And I think we're doing ourselves a disservice by not really leaning into a true generalist education. That should be the default. Clinical and clinical should be a niche. That should be the thing that you decide to go into just because you want to. And I think we need to also do a better way of vetting our students, but that's a marketing thing, and that's also a financial thing, because we do these applications and our essays for our reasonings and stuff like that. And I guess I imagine people aren't putting, oh, I just want a quick way to be a therapist. But at the end of the day, like, we need to really start recruiting people who want to do systems level work. There are people who gravitate towards us for that reason specifically, and we don't do them justice. They end up joining a program. They don't know anything about the practicums because it's not listed anywhere. They find out once they get placed. They find out about the curriculum later, and then you feel like you've invested too much. You've already applied, you've been accepted finally. You've probably started doing your FAFSA and all this other stuff to not pursue it just because it doesn't fit what you wanted it to be. Doesn't sound like a viable option at that point. So hopefully, macro pathways becomes something that, even if you are on a strictly clinical program, that what lives beyond that, and what you have access to in order to get the skill set, get the navigation and translation skills you need to get to where you want to be to do systems level work. Right now, that's all it is. We don't guarantee like you're going to get this job, but we do help them think a little bit differently, and a lot of it is just based off of my own experiences. I consider macro pathways and what I've been doing now much a movement, and very much in the realm of community organizing, and that's macro to me. And I think that if we can reimagine, oh, that's a whole other thing. Macro pathways also lives to reimagine that scope. Macro scope is so small. It says policy, community organizing, and organizational leadership. That would bore anybody. Systems level work can live anywhere. It can live in art. You can think about the comic book artist who's a social worker who cares about representation within comics. Think about the music industry social worker who wants to make sure that artists are taken care of and artists are being treated with equity, and they're not experiencing disparities just because of what they look like, what they sound like, etc. Think about the environmentalist social work who works with environments like forests or animals and stuff like that, and they're all about protecting the environment. I think about all of these things: AI, tech, data,
Yes,
sports,
yes.
library. You can be anywhere. I think that social work can exist in almost any sector and any
I
industry.
agree. Yeah, I
You
I
just have
agree.
totally
to
agree.
you have to just be able to reimagine what it means to be a macro social worker.
And
Yeah.
you can solve some of those great challenges in that way, right? Like, you can
Yeah,
solve some of these grand challenges in being in art, in being in, you know, culture, which is what we're all consuming all the time, being in tech, you can be solving a lot of those issues on a macro level, which is great. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally
and I
agree.
think going back to your point earlier of, trying to make social work more attractive as a profession,
Yeah.
the way we communicate and the way we market about it, because I think, yeah, it's definitely, when I think of just the content out there about social work, it's very clinical leaning. We're talking about the licensure and therapy. And so, yeah, we have some work to do for sure. What do you think are the consequences of not doing I don't of not moving towards that direction, or people not kind of like, coming along with you?
Yeah, we're living it. We're living the consequences currently.
Fair.
um,
Which are
the removal of language is crazy. I would have never thought in 100 years. The idea of removing people from a country because you don't look American, like what does that mean? The idea of, you know, we can just bomb anybody we want and there's no real
Mm.
consequences. Social workers are so equipped to be in spaces. Like, I truly believe social work needs to lean into power. I think there's a power avoidance when it comes to power and finance.
I
Um,
totally agree. Totally
I
agree.
think I think that we need to lean into power and we need to be a shield, right? We need to be somebody. We need to be a profession that anybody who decides to make any decision that affects any community considers us because they know that nothing is going to get past us if it's harmful. Nothing's going to get past us if it's going to create further disparities or inequities, right? Right now, we're an afterthought. Things are happening, and I don't even think they know what social work is. If they did know what social work was and how tied to DEI we were, we'd be under attack for sure. And we are. It's happening
Right.
actually. No, what do no harm. The founder for Do No Harm wrote CSWE recently and called them out for their DEI, DEI efforts. That is just an inkling of things to come because we are not in a position to address these things, prevent these things. We truly need to position ourselves in a place of power so that we can be preventative. We need to be in seats of government. We need to be in law. We need to be in all these macro spaces. And I would love to see more social workers as politicians, like running for office. That would be great.
Why do you think that we have this aversion to power?
Great question.
Ugh. So there's theories. I don't have anything concrete, but one theory is I think that the profession itself has absorbed a lot of religious dogma. I think that there's a lot about. I grew up Christian, so I have a very good understanding of what Christianity is, and a lot of what it kind of means to be a Christian. A lot of it is about doing for others, not doing for yourself. If you do for yourself, you're selfish. um, I constantly preach you need to be selfish. You need to be selfish if you're going to be able to take care of anybody else. You need to take care of yourself. So obviously not in a malicious way, but put yourself first. I think that there's a lot of you know we don't do it for the money, right? Money is the root of all evil, right?
Right.
So
Right. Of course.
so there's there's a lot of things that really tie into religion that I think that the profession is adopting, and I think that is holding us back from a lot of things. There's the phrase, absolute power corrupts absolutely, or absolutely corrupts, and I think that we're not seeking absolute power. We're seeking checks and balances. We're seeking
Mhm.
accountability. We're
Equity.
seeking, yeah, equity. So I think that is one of the main problems from observation. Again, no proof of this. This is just a theory of mine.
What do you think, Faith? I
What do
remember
I think?
I mean, you just mentioned you
Yeah.
said, like, "I also agree with the power thing."
Yeah.
I never thought of it like that.
I think we're scared. I think there's a lot that goes into facing power, and I think as humans, we tend to do what's safe, and I think as a profession, we're doing what might be safe. We talk about having a seat at the table, and I don't think social workers have a seat at the table, if I'm gonna be completely honest. Like,
Yeah.
when you talk about the statistics of our profession and where we lean, like, we are in direct practice. We are not in macro.
80%?
It's crazy. That's crazy, and there aren't jobs for macro social workers, and then yeah, yeah, so I think there's also just a lot of money in systems, and I think social workers are historically, obviously, we talked about this, underpaid, undervalued, and so it's like, how do you find your way in that? And if you feel isolated, you feel like you're on an island by yourself trying to do that, it's gonna be very difficult, so you're gonna pick the safer route. But I think with the power piece, I think we need to be comfortable with having more power. Like, sometimes I think we view power as, like, this really scary, dangerous thing, and it can be dangerous, but it also can be used in a very positive, helpful way, and I think there's obviously a power dynamic going on here right now in our society where the power is not in the right place, the money is not in the right place, and so I wonder if we're actually, as social workers, it's scary to take some power, and I think the
Mm.
religion component is just dead on. I totally agree with that too. Yeah.
Yeah, and what you were
Mhm.
saying about, you're trying to encourage social workers to be more selfish, which is ironic because not what you're saying is ironic, but just the fact that in practice it's not really happening, even though how many times in our programs do we hear self-care, self-care, self-care? So we're talking about self-care, but what are we actually saying when we're encouraging social workers to do self-care? It's like
Yeah. I think the main thing, especially with self-care, is self-care has been painted as this thing that you do. You go and get a massage. You go have a nice dinner by yourself. You have a glass of wine. Like, these are all self-care. Self-care, in my opinion, needs to be reframed as self-compassion. It is an intrinsic thing that needs to happen. And if that external thing does give you that intrinsic feeling, that intrinsic, recharge and composure, then yeah, engage in it. But it doesn't necessarily have to be an activity. Self care can just be separation. It can be quiet and peace. It could be a number of things. It could be reframing, right? Instead of beating yourself up or having negative thoughts about yourself that you're not doing well or you're a burden or anything like this, to reframe that and have a positive outlook and start doing affirmations and start building your own self-esteem up. That's a type of self-care. Self-care is also boundaries, relationship boundaries. Like, at the end of the workday, you're done. Go home. Stop overworking. Stop taking your work home with you. Um, Self-care comes in a lot of different forms. I don't think we talk about that. We just say self-care and expect everybody to just know what that is.
Yeah, and self-care can also be used as a tool sometimes in a negative way. Just like anything, like we talk about self-care as a good thing, it can be used in a negative way to be like, "Oh, you're not doing enough self-care to meet the challenges of your caseload." It's like, do more self-care so that you can have more capacity in your job. And it's like, that's not how we should be doing self-care. And I think like even when you talk about being selfish, I when you're on a plane, this is just an image that came to my mind. When you're on a plane and it's, let's say, the worst case scenario, it's going down. What do they say? Put the mask on yourself first before you put it on your
Exactly.
child. That is what we need to be doing, like
I've
as a
used that
social
same
worker.
example. That's funny.
Yes, like put it on yourself before you put it on your client. Or for just like another little analogy is like there's a ton of research that shows I'm a new mom, so I'm going to talk about that, right? But like there's a ton
Congratulations.
of thank you, I appreciate that. Um there's a ton of research that shows a happy mom means your kid will be happy. If you're not happy and taking care of yourself as a mom, that will directly impact your parenting and your relationship with your kid, and all sorts of problems can happen. And so it's like we have to take care of ourselves. So yeah, just to kind of get add to
yeah,
that conversation around being selfish. I mean, sure,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
totally.
Mm-hmm.
As we're ending, what
Yeah.
do you hope people take away thinking, feeling, or doing after this conversation?
I hope that the takeaway is, one, like, re-emphasizing not anti-clinical, pro-balance. Balance is what my whole deal is. I hope the second that they're able to take away that we have been using such a narrow framing for so much within this profession that we need new minds, we need innovation, we need a broader scope of what we define as macro, what we define as legitimate. We've just been operating through this like very small peephole, and we need to, widen our view. And lastly, I hope that it encourages them to pursue uh, their passion. And what I mean by that is industry social work did not exist until an individual created it. They saw they had a love for music and they matched it with their love for social work and created this wonderful field. So there might be fields that don't currently exist that can be explored and created. Veterinary social work. Someone at some point was like, I like animals and I'm a
Yeah.
social worker. So let's do this. Um, we just really have, I hope that when people hear this, that they are able to reimagine what it means to be a social worker, understand that we can exist in any sector, any industry, wherever there's people, there should be social work, in my opinion.
Love it.
Love it. Well said.
All right. Well,
Mm.
that is all for today. Thank you so much, Patrick, for a
Yeah,
very
thank you.
enlightening conversation.
Yes.
And thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back in 2 weeks.